Okay, welcome everybody. We are going to have a great conversation today about AI in financial services. I am Nathan Lizanowski. I'm Concurrency's Chief Technology Officer, and with me as well is Brian Hayden. Brian, why don't you introduce yourself as well?
Hey there, Brian Hayden. I'm a solution architect at Concurrency. Love working in this space. A lot of experience working with a lot of financial industries. So looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, and welcome to everyone who's joining us. So today we're going to talk about AI in financial services. That is a broad group of companies. So we're mainly targeting this conversation around capital markets, banking, and a little bit of insurance. And we've broken out some of those use cases between both of those sets. So looking forward to covering both the framing of the conversation today, as well as examples of what companies are doing in your sector that are your peers, and help you to gain some perspective so you can plan for your organization. So as we think about the impact that AI has in this particular domain, you can see various points in our history where major changes within technology have influenced the way that we've engaged in our businesses. Some of that happened in manufacturing, some of it was transportation, and particularly in financial services, it was the advent of PCs, the internet, smartphones, the ability for us to engage directly with customers in digital ways. But also, as we all lived through those transitions, it was the transition of skills that happened in each of those spots that were both positive and negative impacts on every person. And the thing that's going to be very important for the financial community is most of your people are information workers in some context. So you are very right for leveraging technology to be able to advance the capabilities of every one of your employees to be able to do more within any given day, both within what we'll call the commodity space and the mission-driven space. But it's going to come with a transformation of skills that they need to become capable of, or maybe relearn that they had before, but they haven't used very often. And we need to help them to be able to engage in that capability. So we're going to talk a lot about that today. So when you think about the capabilities of AI, you're going to see that more and more of this is moving toward where we say this future state. We've called it what we can do now and what's in the future state. Now, as you start on the left-hand side here, you can see many companies have, and people have been doing this for some time, predictive activities against large data sets. Financial services was one of the first movers in this particular domain, using customer data to be able to analyze where markets are going or how I can optimize a client portfolio, and giving prescriptive guidance back to our customers to help them do better. The best companies started to move into storytelling, helping to not only think about what could happen, what's going to happen, and maybe what possibilities exist for your portfolio or your customers based upon potential outcomes that could happen within the family, or choices that you can make, or if I went on this particular vacation or bought this house, how would that impact my portfolio? And then you can see this starts to move now, this latest segment where we explore, and we got this advent of ChatGPT, is this general activities. And general activities are activities that are they're more generalizable across a variety of different tasks. And that's where you're seeing things like Copilot and other build-ons that wouldn't have necessarily been possible in the way we built AI models before, now being able to be actualized within our organizations. And I'll show you some examples of what that looks like. Moving into the idea of directed autonomous activities and creative directive activities that are tied to taking action on things that I'm working with that agent to do. These are partnerships between a human and an AI agent. Where we haven't truly gotten to yet is this idea of general autonomous activities or creative autonomous activities, but that is coming. That is where we know that like AI sort of functions like an intern right now, but it has to be heavily directed and it has to be heavily prescribed. What it's going to get to is that intern is going to grow up. And that intern is going to turn into a full-fledged employee within your team that enables you to offload activities to that person, particularly in the financial space. So a lot of opportunities for us to talk about that today. So let's start by framing the AI journey and what companies are doing in this space. We usually think about this in 6 major steps. The first step is this idea of executive alignment. And most organizations that are providing financial services or something around the insurance space, they already have a business mission. You exist for a reason. You're doing your work within the world because you're doing something valuable. And the best companies at adopting AI they're not changing the mission of their business to be able to do this. And they're not necessarily changing their business strategy. What they're doing is saying, I have a business strategy over X number of years. How does AI fulfill that strategy? And how does it help me gain ground in producing more revenue, retaining customers, increasing customer satisfaction in their relationship with me, building operational savings and how I do the work for my customers, and all that has to support the business mission. So the best companies are starting with that mission and then building a strategy that's based upon that mission, not just based upon like whether if this use case is successful or fails, that's it for my AI journey. Like that's not how this story works. Like you're focusing on your business mission and all of this needs to support that. So once companies think about it in that context, they then start thinking about envisioning and where that moves from there. And how do I leverage both kinds of capabilities in mission-driven opportunities and commodity opportunities that create value for me? And from that, you then sort of earn the right to be able to do proofs of concepts and pilots that move into production implementations that are then lead you into providing value back to the business that you're measuring and you're showing the outcomes from. And sometimes that can move really fast in terms of like Copilot deployments. And sometimes it takes a lot of work to be able to make sure that there's a follow through on the swing to get to a point where that's being leveraged inside of my organization. And then on the tail end, you see this idea of scaled pattern. What this is really dealing with is everything here is somewhat interconnected. I'm doing work within Copilot. I'm building something in Copilot Studio. I'm creating a custom AI model. All of that fits together in a way that has to work as a seamless capability for my end users, if I'm delivering it to my customers of my business, or if I'm delivering it to my agents or my individuals that are working on plans, all of that has to fit together. So the scale pattern is, hey, if I do a lot of this, how does it fit together? How do I think about that picture? So companies will go down that path as well. So the two domains that we're going to talk about today are commodity and mission driven. And commodity is this idea of every person in your organization has the ability to be more as a result of leveraging AI without having to build a custom model. It's not the build story, it's the leverage and use story. So a perfect example of this is spell check. So like everybody uses spell check right now, right? Like if I took that away from you, you'd probably have some problems. You wouldn't be able to write your emails well. You'd be slower to do it. Nobody has a dictionary sitting next to them anymore. So you just would notice this immediate productivity loss that you just don't really realize is there because you just use it almost without thinking about it. That's where commodity AI will continue to push us forward. Each commodity AI capability that we adopt will become something like spell check, where you get to a point where it's like, well, this is just spell check. Like, what do you mean it's AI? Like, no, that is a very rudimentary version of AI. And then on the right-hand side, you have ideas like mission-driven. These are things that are built on the very nature of your business, the heart of your business. They have to be very accurate. They have to be prescriptive. They have to be precise. They have to answer questions a very specific way, not a generalizable way, a very specific way. And oftentimes that's where you gain tons of ground in the market because you're disrupting something or you're bringing something to the table faster that you alternatively did very manually. So both of these fit together in a very cohesive way. So when you think about that in the context of concerns, these are the primary concerns that we're seeing that companies have as they start to adopt AI. The first concern, and this is just based on a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but also some realistic stuff, is the data privacy concern. And where this primarily comes from is people using ChatGPT realizing that like that data put into ChatGPT can be used to retrain other models, or just the realization that anything I put in Google is used to sell me something. And maybe something I've even said out loud that Google knows I said out loud is selling me and putting into my ad stream. Like we know there's a data privacy situation going on here. How do I make sure my data, my customers' data, isn't used outside of what I am building for my own organization? This is very important. Everything we talk about today is using private instances. So internal implementations, your data being your data and no one else's, is a very critical delineation between some of the public implementations of AI that we're seeing. The second is this idea of data readiness. This is really a use case by use case situation. Sometimes the long-term story you're going after requires an enormous amount of data, and you're planning very proactively to go after that because you know what your end game is. Sometimes it's a relatively incremental goal. You already have the data, and AI is a great build on to something you're already doing. We'll talk about examples in both of those streams. So data readiness shouldn't be like a cop-out. It should be like a very intentional understanding of how your data relates to the use cases that are most important to your strategy. In the financial services space, human displacement represents probably one of the more significant situations that we need to be thinking about. Every one of your employees is going to be changed as a result of AI, and that's going to happen over the next 1 to 3 years. So as you are engaging in that story, don't think about it as a reactive thing. Think of it as a proactive thing. How do I enable people to take on new skills and new capabilities? We will talk about that near the tail end of this presentation today. The fourth and probably the second most significant thing we hear is, what if AI gets it wrong? Like, what do I do then? And quality and hallucination is really at the heart of that. Like, there's a lot of conversation about AI's making this thing up, or it's answering it incorrectly, or there's this lawyer that responded to a brief and it cited incorrect case law that's fictitious, right? These things exist. So what's really important is that we're building in the right measures to know whether or not we're being successful with our AI model, just to all up. And because many things that we go to implement AI models around, they're currently not measured well enough. Second is you have to build in hallucination protection to understand whether it's getting this answer from the accurate source or if it made it up. So there's ways to be able to mitigate some of those concerns that allow you to build confidence back into the business. And then the final thing is bias, particularly important in financial services industry. Bias is this area that like data can be used in a way that can draw people into outcomes that aren't appropriate outcomes for who they are. And we need to be very intelligent about how we use that, especially because the financial services industry is so close to people's goals in life that if we're not thinking about the way our data is going to be used, then we can put ourselves in a position where we're leading to outcomes that we didn't expect. So all of these are important, but things that we can manage throughout the development process of AI solutions. So as we think about AI and FinServ use cases, I want you to think about the way the domains between commodity and mission driven start to break down into practical scenarios. So on the far right-hand side here, you can see uses AI aligning to things like M365 Copilot, configures pre-built AI elements, starting to align to things like Microsoft Copilot Studio, and this zone right here associated with building highly functioning AI models, so associated with things like AI, Azure ML Studio. Are these the only products that exist inside of these domains? Absolutely not. They are products that are examples of those domains. You're going to find many different platforms that start to light up commodity AI, semi-custom and fully custom use cases. But what is important is that if you need more accuracy and precision, it's going to lead toward more custom ML scenarios. And as you need less of that, the commodity AI scenarios start to take hold and are easier to take advantage of. So you can see in commodity AI things like writing a faster email or creating a marketing asset. In the semi-custom, you see things like connecting ServiceNow to Teams or documents that are being surfaced for people to be able to find them or answer questions from them. But in this middle zone, you see things like high visibility chatbots that require custom engineering. I'll show you a really interesting one of those that's disrupting the loan market. Or client portfolio optimization. This is people's money we're talking about. We need to make really intelligent decisions about that, and we need to know why it came up with that decision. So as we move into certain zones, we need to build models that are very trustworthy and are based on data that we understand. We have an explainability associated with that sort of model. So talking through a little bit of the commodity examples, here's a few that I think everyone can take advantage of. Finding information and answers, summarizing meetings and action items, creative work, things where we're like the world is full of like the Johnny-come-lately AI expert, right? But like the creative work of these prompts will lead to me being able to do more. A colleague of mine says, never create a draft again, right? This idea of like, basically the hardest word to write is always the first one. So the creative work is just an idea of like getting me started. Analytical work, this idea of doing things that require a lot of deep processing to get to an answer. Excel Copilot has got some really cool on-fire capabilities to take a look at. Planning their day. One of my colleagues just got back from vacation, went to Copilot and said, what happened while I was gone? And I think just even things like that, like joining a meeting late and getting the summary, some really interesting capabilities. And then admin tasks. So I want to take a break here and ask Brian, like anything that for you, like you're also a Copilot user, and you have had some experience working with it, or anything that stuck out to you when you think about things that have really force multiplied your just general tasks, not even like the mission-driven kind of thing, just stuff you're doing on a daily basis.
Well, I do a lot of presentations, and so probably one of the most time-saving things that I can do is, for example, add a slide to my PowerPoint presentation that talks or compares two different, ideas. And it usually comes up with a, kind of a creative, beautiful thing. It basically goes out and does a Google search for me, or a Bing search, and pulls some results in it. And it's a great starting point. Another thing that I like to talk about is something that happened like the first day that I was using Copilot, and I was in a meeting, and I missed something. Like somebody said something and I kind of missed it, and I typed in there, hey, tell me what John just said, 2 minutes ago about what he did on Monday. And, it pulled right back up the summary. I didn't have to like embarrass myself and say, what did you say? I didn't catch that, or I wasn't paying attention. I was able to get caught up really quick. So a lot of really amazing things it can do. And every single day I'm trying something new that just surprises me. Like, I can't believe this does that.
Yeah, totally.
I would also add one last thing too. Uh, Fortunately, concurrency is great about, giving me access to it. But if they didn't, I would do this myself. It is just, I would buy the license. I would make concurrence. I just pay them. I'm going to do it. It's great.
So let's show them a couple examples. So one of the starting points a lot of people see is the idea of never create a draft again, and starting through the process of developing a document. Now, I find my perspective of this in the PowerPoint drafting is it's much better when you give it excellent source material. So if you give it notes, you give it a template you want it to use, that tends to accelerate its capability over like starting from total scratch. But I've found this to be a great starting point, especially the things I don't like doing, like writing a statement of work or developing a template for something. Just getting me down the road and not having to spend the time on the initial words, especially something where like it's a functional document. It's not like when I blog on something or I write online on LinkedIn, I generally eschew like using AI for that. I really prefer to like just make that my own authentic self. But when I write like a statement of work or something, I really prefer just like, man, how can I get this done faster? Because I hate the process of creating those things. So if I can use a tool like this to get it done faster, 100%. Same situation with PowerPoints. So like I do a lot of PowerPoint creation, just like Brian. And can I use a presentation asset to have it create just starting point of ideas that I can use to be able to think about the comments I'm bringing back to a company, and that can really help me to take that first step. I'll say my favorite, and we're starting to make some of these capabilities very specific. So there's companies even coming out that produce presentation assets that plug into Copilot that start to do very financial industry specific activities like presentation prep associated with industry or company research to help you prepare for the presentation you're doing. So FactSet's an example that there's a whole variety of platforms that are doing a lot of similar things that help inform the platform that are already plugged into Copilot that help you gain ground. Probably my favorite Copilot feature out of every feature is meeting summaries. Just like Brian, what you said, like this requires zero prep. Like this, I mean, there's a lot of things in Copilot you need to know how to use very specifically to gain ground, for it to be something that's like really useful for you. And there's some things that need to be turned on. Meeting summaries tend to be something that are like very intuitive. So for example, in this meeting summary, this is using Copilot and Teams Premium. It's giving me an index of when people talked, what the meeting notes were, follow-up tasks, and questions I like to ask are things like, what was the tone? And here you can see it's actually describing the tone very accurately. The tone between Liberty and Concurrency was professional and collaborative. They discussed various topics. There weren't any disagreements, et cetera, right? It's like giving me a good description. Another thing I really love about it is joining a meeting late just happens to me because I've always got this back-to-back stuff. Joining a meeting, what happened in the meeting so far? Just like you said, Brian, like that alone is useful. Just being able to tell me what happened. What's the action items? What's the summary of what occurred within this meeting? Giving us a pretty good understanding of like what's happening, and you can back that out on a more general basis of what's happening in the context of my relationship with this person or account or company or project, and it can give you those summaries and assets. So why this is so useful, nobody wants to be the meeting note taker, and meeting note taking is often like really arduous and annoying, and that person tends not to be very engaged in the meeting. So being able to focus people's time and enable them to be engaged. Okay, so what have we learned from Copilot adoption? What we've learned is that people don't want to give it up. That's really at the end, the net of it, is that people find there's enough benefit that they don't want to give it up, and that it leads to aggressive productivity. And this is just the start of it. I mean, literally, Copilot is like 6 months old. Like we're getting to a point where like, wow, like I'm already getting benefit. Imagine where it's going to be in a year. Say amazing stuff. So I think this is really something that is sort of an obvious go-to for most companies, especially information workers. But you're going to have to be intentional about your adoption. It's not like you just go turn it on. You do have some activities you need to go through in terms of doing an effective adoption, and that's something we can talk more about. Okay, so let's get into mission-driven scenarios. These are going to be ones that are very specific to financial services industry, and we'll group them into two sets. So the first set, and I've kind of boxed these all together to go through them, but I just want to show two different examples of spaces that we've been talking with. So the first space is things like banking and capital markets. You can see a lot of very interesting use cases on here: loan origination automation, customer support, it being a knowledge base, helping build teams and next best action activities together. Even like pitch book generation, stuff that I started to show earlier, risk mitigation, claim automation. There's a lot that goes into the banking and capital market space, but many of these have been examples that we're seeing companies wanting to talk about. Similar kinds of conversations in insurance, except it's a slight pivot, right? A lot of customer support automation happening here, trying to drive a better relationship. I had a scenario where I was adding my daughter onto my insurance for my car, and I was curious what it was going to cost. So I called my insurance agent, and they didn't know how to like answer that question quickly for me. And eventually they said they'd get it back to me, never did. I had to call them back. It was just like a totally arduous, annoying experience where I was like looking for a great customer service and I didn't get it. And then it would have been one of those scenarios where like, can't I just go to the app and ask this question? Like, what would it cost to add my daughter? She's 16, never been in an accident, good student, et cetera, right? Like, it should just be able to tell me. These are scenarios where like insurance and capital markets are lighting up new asynchronous abilities for people to get their question answered while they keep doing their regular tasks, rather than having to go and have to actually talk to a person. And there's many times you want them to, but there's a lot of times you don't. You just want them to be able to get their question answered. You want to have the best relationship possible. So we're going to talk through a variety of examples and cover those. Brian, any within these two zones that are really sticking out to you that you think have been meaningful, both inside of banking and capital markets, as well as insurance, before we start to show some of the examples?
Yeah, so in the banking, world, the regulatory muck, right? Getting answers about regulations is something that I see, a really strong use case for, and some of our customers have experimented with it. And similarly with insurance companies, with the insurance world, these verbose contracts, being able to answer questions about some of your customers' contracts can be a daunting, question, or like an insurance policy, or understanding some of the financial details about what a contract is going to turn into. Like a specific example that I worked with a customer on was trying to find variances between margins across their different contracts and identify outliers. So a lot of good use cases, and the documents that usually support these are usually verbose, and let an LLM take care of that work for you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Okay, so as we talk into some examples, you're going to notice they're going to fall into two lanes. One is incremental examples, things that you're already doing, you just want to do faster. And then this disruptive idea, which is the market doesn't truly engage this way now, and we're going to come to the market in a way that changes the way that your customers engage with in the transaction or the customer service relationship, and take a whole set of functions within the market and shift it. So this will show you some examples of where companies are doing that in the financial services space. Okay, so on that note, this is one that we are working with a company right now on, which is self-service loan application with zero harm to credit. So this is a company that has launched a ability to not use a loan officer as part of the loan application process for a certain lane of self-service loans. It's now live in California. And their idea and the way they've built this is to use a self-service experience, kind of like if you've done your taxes on TurboTax, kind of like TurboTax, except for the loan industry, and doing an amazing job of thinking about, like, how do I engage this space differently? And how do I help them to think about the problem differently? How do I engage like an average consumer who just has a standard loan and maybe ask them the best questions possible so I can mitigate common problems before they get to the hard credit pull, and do this in a self-service way where they're saving on what they would traditionally be paying for those costs. So this is a really interesting example where, like, a whole lot of people spend their time doing that today, and they're going to have to think about, how do I do that differently, or how do I build value on top of the ability to do this in a self-service way rather than necessarily having to do the entire process. So fascinating how this is changing so quickly, and how this is driving, they have the opportunity to drive tremendous value for consumers, but also impact into the sort of loan origination space. Another example, and I think this is fascinating. When you do your taxes, take a quick look for this. So Intuit launched their self-service chatbot that exists in the TurboTax experience. So in the process of going through and filling out your taxes, they have these sort of like guided experiences and non-guided experiences, and then totally self-driven, right? What they launched is this chatbot that pops up in a couple different spots. It pops up when you're missing items. It pops up when you have questions. It provides interactive help, direct, and then it also leads you into a directed conversation if you need it. Escalates to person enabled versus AI agent enabled. And I think this is a nice example of what many financial services, insurance, and even this kind of tax prep sort of scenario can do, which is, I need to figure out a way to meet my customer where they're at. How can I help my customer to get their question answered faster, or help them through the process of answering their question? So in this context, I'm finding that there's a question about the refinance. It wasn't answered prior. We're bringing that up. We're asking them to answer it right in line. And then that's going right back into the form that we're filling out to be able to correct it before it becomes a problem in the actual return. Same kind of idea on any kind of question I might have in the context of filling out my form, and what's the state of my taxes? Am I exposed? Is this a high risk situation, et cetera, et cetera? Some of those questions I think it does really well. Some of those questions I think they're holding back and they're still working on it, but it's a great start for where they're going with the platform. So customer support, just all up, is a great use case for using AI and enabling your customers to be able to get a better experience from you, enabling them to get information faster around their policy or their changes to their policy, move ads, changes, in the context that is supported by your people that can make sure that certain things are done right. So a great starting point, and something to think about pretty strongly. Another example in the same space, and it's a healthcare example, but I think it's very meaningful because this is actually something we all deal with, is questions about your insurance plan. So, and there's many companies we're working with that do things like processing of transactions and so on. They have questions about. The goal of this is to say, if someone has questions about their insurance plan internal to a company, or if I'm serving if I'm served by one of these larger insurance firms, what does that exactly look like? And how do I ask that question? Well, I can give that in a self-service experience where they never have to call their HR professional. They never have to call the insurance company. They don't have to call an insurance professional. They can get this questions answered very directly for them. Like, is this covered? Is it something that's in my plan? Is it something that it does or doesn't do? Like, maybe I had a question about in a similar adjacent idea. Like, if a tree falls on my house, is it covered? If a tree that I failed to, like, if I knew it was, if the branch was falling off and I didn't do something about it, is it still covered? Like, these are some of these questions that you might put into a chat and see what it says. And we can optimize that. We can send only the most important questions to your rep and answer the questions correctly that we already know about back to individual consumers. So another space that we're seeing this, and I love Brian to talk more about this in a second, is things like customer call analysis. So we are seeing that oftentimes companies have these big phone banks of individuals. They're working on answering customer calls. They're optimizing different parts of the process. And things that you saw earlier in the commodity space are things like, you could simply ask the question of the call is, was there a customer intro? Was there information provided that was accepted by the customer? What was the tone? Like, what was the tone when the call started? What was the tone when the call ended? Did my customer rep, on average, bring my people that are calling in that are frustrated forward to a space where they're less frustrated by the time they end the call? Or are they basically in the same spot and I'm not moving in a better direction? Is there a follow-up action taken? This can be taken directly from call logs or call recordings. So, for example, what was the tone of the call? Ali's tone during the meeting was polite and respectful. They introduced themselves, et cetera, et cetera. And then being able to take the action items that are coming out of that, leading to a direct relationship from call data, how I'm tracking them, to be able to then take something that in the past, even a year ago, would have been impossible. Like, the amount of AI training to be able to just do call analysis is ridiculous. Now the ability to use large language models to infer that information and then provide data back is fantastic. So this is a space that many organizations can use at scale to be able to optimize their customer relationships. So Brian, you've been working in this space for a little while. What has been your experience with, customer call centers, call analysis, optimization, things like that?
Yeah, my experience is that the AI tooling that's available in a lot of these platforms is okay. I mean, it does a relatively decent job. I mean, you can get sentiment analysis out of it, but what it doesn't understand necessarily is your business, and so being able to ground, some of its interpretation of what that call outcome was with information that's relevant around your business is actually increases the value that you get out of some of these tools. So yeah, there's a gap yet where a lot of the out of the box tooling might get you like a simple dashboard, but it's not really going to get you valuable, impactful information out of it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you. Okay, another example that we've been seeing value in is wealth management teams. This kind of leads us into a combined set: wealth management, next best action, parent-child relationships. All of this fits in this same zone of optimizing my customer relationships, leading to increased retention, leading to increased monetization of my customer, bringing them to a better place, helping them to make good decisions, keeping them in the family of my financial relationship, whether that's a insurance relationship you have, or it's your investment relationship, or maybe a combination of both, that relationship and understanding how to manage it. So things that we're seeing people doing is thinking about AI functions as another team member. How do I use AI as a delegated team member for research, meeting prep, portfolio analysis to get me ready for the conversations that I'm going to have, and maybe take that and send that to my customer as well. Like, research this possibility for the customer, return this data about my portfolio. These are examples where it's not just a co-pilot, right? I'm talking to a business repository that has this information, writing it back into prep data that I then use to be able to prepare for my customer. Tell me about the recent accidents for my customer. I'm preparing for a like every 6 months, my insurance agent calls me, right? Like they need to retain me. They want to keep me engaged, but it seems like, they don't always know exactly what's happening. What if he did a better job prepping and had like understood whether or not I was going to be doing X, Y, or Z? What changes should I make to my customer's portfolio? Prescribing changes that I should be making as an advisor. Inform my team members about the schedule for the week. Preparing for my week. The best advisors are always preparing their week to be effective. So how do I force multiply all my team members to be able to be more effective with my customers to increase retention? And that's really much of the game associated with wealth management teams. We're working as a team. We need to work as a team together and then also use AI as an agent within that team. Also, interpretation information. So a question that I asked was, what are non-obvious conclusions from this image? You can see that this is from Monarch. It's providing a little bit of a breakdown of the cash flow of a person. This is not mine. And then a breakdown of how people are spending their money. Asking the question of what's a non-obvious conclusion? Did a pretty effective job of indicating what are things that are not obvious, or at least maybe they're statements. Maybe you might think they're obvious, but what are the statements coming out of this particular person? What's interesting about this is once an AI agent is able to interpret something like this, it can then be used as data across the entire portfolio. And it can also, because I can ask questions of the data from a visual sense, just the nature of this, right? Like large language models, they used to just be able to ask the questions in the text. Notice what I'm doing is I'm asking questions of a image. That's a whole different game. So I'm taking the image, I'm asking Copilot to surface using the image interpretation, what's happening in the image. You can see it found, for example, the savings rate in comparison to the average. That's giving me a perspective to provide back to my customer. I didn't have to, as a person, go and analyze this myself to get this prep for my meeting with my customer. I have this already ready for me to be able to provide positive and negative comments back to them if I don't have time to prep. Such a significant efficiency in terms of being able to provide information back, or it could be something that you build right into a robo experience with a customer to say, you're using my app, here's some feedback that I can give to you directly from us understanding what's happening, even just from an image. So this also relates into something called next best action, which is essentially the idea of guiding my customer or guiding my reps to be able to make effective counsel to my customers. So my customer's in a certain position. I have activities that have been happening with them. I have chats, I have recordings of calls, so these transcripts. Think about it as like every call with them could be recorded and put into a digital asset that I could use to do next best action. Like some incredible things are possible. Digital events that happen to them, what's their demographics? The demographic thing we have to be very careful about in terms of the bias activity that could fall into that. And there might even be some things we have to exclude from that to even use it. Moving that into behaviors that then drive a specific action. And this is what we're finding many of our customers are asking us for is, how do I not just provide information like I did in the previous step, but especially provide what you should do? What is the task that the person should take based upon what we know about them that then leads us into we let them go, or we keep them on, or we do a phone call, or we do a promotion about something we know that they're interested in based upon what I know about them. Like, think about, in a sense, think about the digital trail you leave, right? Facebook, LinkedIn, calls you had with them. I can theoretically know everything about you. How do I use that information to be able to optimize how I bring back excellent suggestions of how you improve your financial position and use that as part of a marketing communication back, understanding that we have to have very careful lines and guardrails around what we can do and can't do. But we also have an ability for us to be able to leverage some of this information to be able to drive the best relationship possible. So if we do what the data shows is that if we do this well, we have better lifetime value from our customers, better engagement, we have better net promoter score, meaning they stick with us, and we have better conversion of not only just taking one service from us, but also our adjacent services that they're going to receive great services from. If we don't do it, we have more complaints. We know less about them. So they just leave because we're not getting value. And then we have higher costs because we're always having to get new customers and bring on new reps because existing reps aren't successful. So we need to get a new rep that has a new book of business to have them go after it. Like how can we build stronger relationships where they want to stick with us? And it's not built on the like old school model of like, I just work with this guy and he just talks to me every couple months and just kind of throws out an opinion. Like the newest generation wants data driven. They want ease of use. They want something at the tips of their fingers. Bringing this in, but next best action drives more benefits. So this is where we're seeing a lot of these projects going down the direction of, which then also relates into this idea of multi-generational relationships. One of the most important things that companies are wrestling with right now is I may have a relationship with a parent based upon a buyer that I have, and they've been with us for a long time. They have this relationship with a old school rep. But then I have all these children that are going to inherit, or I have new high performing jobs. They're in their 40s. They're doing great stuff. And maybe they have children of their own and they're using a robo platform. They're doing all their stuff on Robinhood and on Monarch, and they're planning their own stuff. And you're like, oh, shoot, like I'm going to lose this whole relationship over time because they're not interested in working with me, even if they are high value. How do I create a relationship with them that drives that connection and shows that I'm like with it, right? Like I'm creating the relationship that creates value for them above and beyond what they can do on their own, or maybe in conjunction with that. So understanding the whole family, AI-powered drip campaigns back to the entire family relationship, engaging them as a family, not just as an individual, auto generation of documents that they need and should see. Combine that with the next best action, and companies are starting to see like AI can power this whole ecosystem of relationships that I have to create more value. So I think this is like the heart of it. If you take these couple like wealth management teams, next best action, and multi-generational relationships, you kind of have it in a nutshell, right? Like how do I retain, maximize their capabilities and value that they get from me and drive more capabilities from that? Like how do I ensure that I have the best relationships possible? So that kind of leads us into this idea of risk management, this idea of one of the things I always have to think about is I have to step back from my portfolio and think about risk in a context of a lot of different steps. And again, this is a space where bias can enter in. We have to be very aware of data we're using and not using. Risk management lets us think about it as a bigger picture and not just sitting in ad hoc and reactive, but one of the things you might have seen earlier was like you're predicting what's going to happen, you're prescribing what you should do about it. And then if you're really getting into a good space, you're storytelling what could happen if you make certain choices. And that's what enables you to make really intelligent forward moves is your storytelling, and you're making intelligent choices based upon the possibilities of those stories occurring within a person's life. Like we know that this person is going to do this and this and this based upon this step. The same way that I know that like if I leave some cookies out, my 2-year-old is going to climb up on a stool and eat them. Like I know that this person is going to move from the starter house to this, to this, to this based upon these life choices they're making. Like I can optimize my portfolio with them based upon that data. There's ways for me to drive better relationships based upon me managing the risk of their situations and knowing more about them, and then knowing what the risk of my entire portfolio, my organization is at. And AI can provide a ton of value in that space. Another use case here that I think everybody should be aware of is just like anything that happens a lot in your business, there's a great opportunity for AI for. Claim adjudication is one of those examples in the insurance zone. So in this case, you can see request for payment on a procedure, request for payment on a procedure, request for payment on a procedure. Wait a minute. All those procedures are actually something called a root canal, and maybe that's actually just a single code. And some claim adjudication is really good at that. Like, hey, you're trying to scam the system because you submitted this stuff. But AI takes that up a step by saying it's not just an if-then statement. We actually can tell if that all fits into the same zone, allowing us to then easily go through the process of matching certain codes, not matching others, approval, rejection, or human review, right? Automatic approval, cool, you fit into this zone. Rejection, no way, Jose, like that's not going to fit, that you're obviously fitting into this other zone. It just straight up doesn't match, it's the wrong thing. Or maybe in this case, we send it down the human review space and we say, all right, like this doesn't look like it's fitting in the right spot. We're going to give it a human review before it gets submitted. And that's going to kind of be our validation step. If 80% of these could flow through the top zone without us having to do anything, and then the rest of them actually have to go into human review, puts us in a totally different position than we were before for potentially millions of requests that are coming across our process. All right. So this is a really cool example that I think is killer in the video space, the insurance space. This video isn't live. It's something I wish was live, but essentially what happens is this guy walks around his car, right? And in this video, the guy's car is busted up, right? He's got scuffs and got damage and stuff. And oftentimes you'd have an insurance adjuster look at that, or they'd validate it's correct or whatever. And what this does is it takes that camera footage and it summarizes all that into a description of the car damage. So you can see in that section 2, the rear side of the blue Toyota Camry has sustained significant damage characterized by deep scratches and scuff marks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is an accurate depiction, just trust me, it's an accurate depiction of the video that the person walks around the car with. That allows us to optimize the entire insurance process associated with getting the claim, submitting it, what it should cost to repair, sending that off to potential providers, not even having to have a person physically go to the provider, actually just delivering the video and the description. There's a lot of optimization that can happen here. It's another example of like a disruptive space that's changing the way that we can speed up the process of getting paid and fixing the thing that went wrong in my life. Like if something bad happens, customer service, or in the case of insurance, how can I make that process as seamless and easy for my customer as possible? This is another example. Okay, so last thing here we got on an example of pulling data. One of the things I showed earlier was like running a process, right? Like extracting text, running through the layout, moving that into something. You can see what we're doing here is we're pulling data, we're turning that into something else, and then in this case, we're actually turning that into JSON that then can be used for another purpose. So sometimes even the things you're using for AI are just like middleware in a process that you're building, but things you couldn't do before with RPA. RPA has a lot of plays inside the financial space. Many people went down that road. They just found that like they couldn't get the impact they wanted because it wasn't capable enough of doing the kind of job you wanted to do. Now AI kind of brings that interpretability, generalizability up a notch that allows you to use it in this space as well. So anything that like you just need to do on a recurring basis. I've included this one. I think it's important, not because like financial industry necessarily is directly tied to development efficiency, but I think this will be helpful for Brian to talk a little bit about. I'll just kind of prep it, and then Brian, you can give your statement or thoughts about it. So one of the more early like generalizable capabilities that was released before anything else in Copilot was GitHub Copilot. And one of the reasons why this was so important is because it's kind of like it's a prep before we ran into it in like the other spaces. Like what was the result of using GitHub Copilot for a developer that needed to produce something valuable? And what we found was that, developers with IntelliSense are faster and better. Developers using ChatGPT were faster than that, but there's a problem because that could be exposed and so on. Developer with Copilot and Copilot Chat naturally force multiplied the kinds of activities they were able to get done. And even more so in the future where an AI developer essentially is like working with an offshore. Like here's do this for me, bring it back to me when it's done. It's not there yet. It's definitely not there yet, but it will get to that point. And that's where things like the results from actually the study that across these 95 people, split into halves, 50 didn't use, 45 used. The 45 that used it completed the task in 1 hour and 11 minutes. The ones that did not, it was 2 hours and 41 minutes. Now, there's a lot of examples that kind of back this up, but I think this is a really great sort of A/B that helps you see that like once people start using this in a really concrete way, it leads to benefits. Brian, I mean, you've certainly been a Copilot user for some time. You want to kind of talk a little bit about your experiences in the development space using these tools?
Yeah, so 6 or 7 years ago, I was using JetBrains, pretty regularly to just make my life easier as a developer. And it was just this tool that I had in my tool belt that I couldn't live without. And if I went to a new assignment or a new engagement, I would bring it along with me just because I just needed it. And it started to get commoditized. Visual Studio started to like build in some of those features, and I kind of maybe gotten away from it a little bit. But I always still like look back at, this was a tool that I absolutely needed. And now moving forward with like Copilot, at first it was, being able to, go to ChatGPT and ask some questions and get some sample codes. Now I get this integrated into my environment, and it's really elevated that ability to leverage these tools in a meaningful way. So to me, it's the JetBrains of 2010, or I guess if you want to look back that long, but it's invaluable for development teams. Great use cases would be, I've got a new developer that's going to be jumping in to help out with something that they're unfamiliar with. Maybe it's a toolkit that they're unfamiliar with, or maybe it's just jumping into some code they haven't worked in before. Being able to use the Copilot chat features, just what does this file do? What does this class do? What does this thing, is invaluable and gets them up to speed, very quickly. Another colleague of mine talked about doing some Unity development, and that's something that's got a very, very high, learning curve. It takes, typically a couple of months to get yourself ramped up. But with, things like Copilot, like you can be effective using these, really advanced toolkits, very quickly. And then I guess the last thing I would say is we're just starting now to see the benefits of GitHub's Copilot Enterprise, which is bringing in features that help ground to your organization's repos and code bases. So it's exciting to see that feature come along. I can't wait for some of our customers and ourselves to start using it.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. Okay, in our last 5 minutes, and then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about what this means to us as people. And I think that's just an important closing area for us to think about and how we prepare. So when we started this off, we talked about two lanes, mission-driven and commodity. Both of these start with executive alignment and drive forward into achieving outcomes, but they have to be partnered with human-first AI. We have to think about an outcome that is inclusive of human flourishing as a goal and not as something we just kind of do as an extras thing if we have time. So when you think about your people in your organization, think about their current job as having a high degree of repetitive work. They come to the work every day, they do this thing, and this thing is how they think about themselves. And if I all of a sudden took away that thing, would I be able to function in the top quartile of human achievement by being always on creative? Or would I not really know what to do with myself? And sometimes the way you can test that is if people have gaps in their schedule, are they listless or do they actually use that effectively? A lot of people just don't know how to use it effectively. They're going and watching YouTube videos because they don't know what to do with their time. This is a transition we need to help people through, and it's not going to necessarily be intuitive, and it's not necessarily intuitive to be able to delegate for a lot of people. So this is a very important shift that many organizations are going to go through. So we'll see examples like financial advisors to ones that are prescriptive AI-driven financial services. People need to be able to partner with that. Self-quoting, ask and answer business systems, describe and draft for presentation prep, coding to autonomous development assistance, automating processes. These all fit into these transitions of tasks that we're performing that we're not necessarily intuitive right now. So one of the things that you might ask is how do I get started? And the question everybody will say, well, is everybody going to become a data scientist? Am I learning data scientist curriculum for every one of my employees? No, of course not. That will impact less than 0.1% of your staff. Or maybe not at all. Your goal is going to be about upskilling everyone around data science. Upskilling is not about data science. It's about everyone deserving an AI assistant. And it's reawakening creativity. I think this is one of the most important components of that, and it being necessary to have a growth mindset in order to be able to make that happen. And it's not about essentially adding new roles to the organization. It's about adding skills to existing functions that allow them to be able to be more. So things that you will see in your organization as you start to gain ground here are all these technical functions like data engineering and data scientists and AI engineers that either prepare the data, build trusted AI models, or use a foundational model to do something. But You may not even have any of those people, or you may be partnering with someone like us to do that. What you really need to build is this idea of an AI practitioner, people that are creating and enjoying value from AI. They're experts on the business. They're able to force multiply themselves by using these tools. And that's not necessarily an intuitive thing. So when you think about AI skills, truly these are human skills. They're growth mindset, experimentation, creative energy, delegation to AI agents, thinking with the end in mind. Just the idea of thinking with the end in mind and saying, this is what I need, AI, go prepare that for me, is not something most people know how to do. So this is a transition for your team. So when you think about your executives and how they need to be the starting point, it's what does the mission of my organization look like through the lens of AI? How do I prepare my organization to be able to enter into new age, people, services, capabilities to be able to deliver more value? You saw in the examples today, there's numerous ways the companies are already creating outcomes using AI. Your organization needs to prepare for the same. Challenge your organization to enable AI for every employee. That's not just like, hey, turn on Copilot tomorrow. It's we need to prepare a plan that leads us down the path to gain outcomes that are tied to every person's job. That means I have new skills. I'm challenging my employees to be more. I'm helping them to think about their job in a different way. Maybe they are doing a completely new job tomorrow based upon what I'm able to do in an automated sense now. And then I'm measuring that engagement, both of AI's impact across the company and across every employee. And that's how I'm judging success. Back to the mission of the organization. Did I achieve my strategic plan? And did this help? Like, that's got to be the net thing you're actually measuring this against. So ultimately, when we think about how you take next steps, we know that what you need to do is organize these core ideas to be able to put in front of your organization how I take advantage of commodity AI and take advantage of mission-driven AI. So what we want to suggest you do, and as you close down today, we want you to take next steps. We love for you to do an AI Copilot Executive Envisioning Workshop. We do that for free. We invest in you to come out and do these workshops with you to help you drive value in your executive team. Just today, I had a 6 a.m. executive meeting with a company. I have a executive meeting about an hour and a half after this with the CEO, CFO, COO to drive true outcomes within these organizations. This is the way you get started. It's not just an IT project, it is a organizational project. There is Microsoft funded use case validation that we engage in. And there's also AI and Copilot company-wide envisioning sessions. We'll do that up to 100 people. We've done that in person and virtual to widen the tent and get people excited. So we'd love to do this with you. As you close down, fill out our form regarding that, but also give us feedback. Like, I just want to know if this was valuable to you. Like, did you leave this learning something? Did it provide you value? Please provide us some feedback. I just want to hear, like, did you love it? Did you hate it? Is there something we could have done better? Like, that allows us to keep improving this as we go forward, as we present this to other people. So thank you. And we can stick around if you have some questions. We would love for you to put those into the chat, and Brian and I will hit those as you have some questions. All right, thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and we will see you on the flip side.
Thank you.